or Reaganomics in the 1980s, it's the same idea. You give tax breaks to the people at the top. The idea is that business expands, creates jobs, and employs more people. More people get paychecks, and it trickles down to the people at the bottom. And when you're talking about the politics of the 1920s, you're talking about the three guys, Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. We had looked at Harding, and we know that the Harding administration is known not just for tax cuts, high tariffs, and deregulation, but it's also known for scandal. The Teapot Dome scandal, the Ohio gang, really diminishes Harding's reputation to the point where most historians lump him at the bottom or near the bottom of American presidents. Hello. His successor, Calvin Coolidge, we talked about, doesn't say much, doesn't do much, likes to sleep, vetoed the McNary-Haugen Farm Aid bill, takes a very laissez-faire approach to governance. He is president from 1923. He gets reelected in 1924 in his own right, so he's elected to his own term. He serves that term and then decides to leave. Chooses to leave office. I always found that curious. Calvin Coolidge chose to leave office at a time of unprecedented prosperity. You'd never seen the economy as exuberant as you had seen it in the 1920s. It's part of the reason why the 1920s is called the Roaring Twenties. It's because of the economic progress that you see in the 1920s. Businesses taking off, consumer products being produced left and right, people buying all manner of things from automobiles to electric waffle irons. And yet Calvin Coolidge chooses to leave office in 1928, chooses not to run for a second term, which he could have run for. And his replacement is the Commerce Secretary, a man who had built a reputation as someone who could get things done. The man who had headed the Food Administration during World War I, he had headed a relief effort after the war, providing food and medicine relief to Europe. He was very well renowned. Everybody knew him to be very smart. He was literally an engineer. He had graduated from Stanford University, their first graduating class, I think in 1893. And that guy is Herbert Hoover. And in 1928, Herbert Hoover promises more of the same. He says, if you elect me, I will continue Calvin Coolidge's policies. If you elect me, I will continue prohibition. And really the 1928 election came down to, do we continue with prohibition or not? Is prohibition working or not? The Republicans want to continue with prohibition. The Democrats make a fateful move. They choose to embrace repealing prohibition in 1928, and they nominate as their candidate New York Governor Al Smith. By the way, for as common a name as Smith is, this is the only time you see a Smith running for president. Al Smith is the governor of New York, but he's got a couple of strikes going against him. One, he's in favor of repealing prohibition at a time when prohibition is generally seen as, supported. He is also Catholic. He is the first major presidential candidate to run on a national ticket as a Catholic. So while the Democrats normally win in the South, the fact that he is a Catholic means the KKK no likey. And so you're going to see Democratic turnout in the South diminished. Hoover says, look, man, I've been running the Commerce Department for Harding and for Coolidge. And commerce, that's business. You elect me, man, it's going to be prosperity as far as the eye can see. He promises a chicken in every pot, a car in every garage. He says there is no reason why nobody in the United States can't have prosperity. And he says, I see an end to poverty in our lifetime. That this prosperity will trickle down to everybody. And again, you can see some of the literature here for the campaign. Some a little less fortunate than others. Enjoy that. Nobody's paying attention, but that's okay. You can't make this crap up, friends. Oh yeah, that was really a button in 1928.
Do they mean the same thing?
No, they don't.
Okay.
They don't. But enjoy. So, politically, you've got these conservative Republican presidents with their low taxes, no regulation, high tariffs approach, pro-prohibition, and that's kind of how the politics is defined of the time. And you can see here, in the election of 1928, good God indeed. Democratic votes were very much suppressed in the South because Al Smith was a Catholic. As a matter of fact, the Democrats are so afraid of nominating another Catholic, you don't see another Catholic on a major party ticket until Kennedy in 1960. All right, so that's your politics for the 1920s. What about economics? What about business? How is business being conducted? Well, where labor unions had prospered under the progressives, they are going to decline under these Republican regimes. You've got pro-business presidents, which means that a lot of labor unions are either going to be shut down or diminished, or there are going to be ways of getting around the power of labor unions. 5 million union members by 1920. By 1928, you've got less than 3 million union members. So union membership declines over the 1920s. And that's due in large part to a lot of the post-war economic problems, competition for jobs, the fact that a lot of labor unions are painted with the broad brush of socialism or radicalism. If you support a labor union, you're supporting communism. And the Supreme Court is going to strike rulings that go against labor unions. And I find it interesting because the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in 1921, Warren Harding named him. William Howard Taft, former president, former progressive president. And yet, here he is, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, and he's making rulings that rule against labor unions. And the idea was that, labor unions were bratty. Labor unions demanded too much. Labor unions were impacting American business. And so labor unions needed to be checked. So what's it like for workers working in factories in the 1920s? We're producing all this stuff. Factories came up with the idea that the way to diminish the power of labor unions was to actually pay people. Pay people a living wage. It's a philosophy that I wish a lot of businesses today would embrace called welfare capitalism, where you start to give your workers fringe benefits, hoping that their union activity will diminish. They're not going to go on strike if they're getting a pension. They're not going to go on strike if they're getting a shorter work week or a higher wage. And the idea behind welfare capitalism was you pay your workers a decent wage that they can live off of. In exchange, they promise not to join unions. We'll pay you. We'll give you your benefits. We'll give you the things that you want. We just can't have you joining unions and going on strike. So, for instance, the Ford Motor Company started paying their workers an unheard of amount of $5 a day, which was big time at that. And the Ford philosophy was, and this is a really good philosophy, I think, as a personal, citizen of the United States, the company should pay its workers a wage that allows the worker to buy the product they're making. I think that's fair. And that's the Ford philosophy in the 1920s. You pay the worker enough that he can buy the car he's making. If you pay your workers enough, yes, you will see a little bit of a downside on the front end of your profits. But you are putting money in the pockets of more people. They will buy your products, and you'll see the profit on the back end. But you've got to have the long view. More money in more people's pockets mean more people are going to buy crap. That's how economies work. Money is the grease on the wheels. So a lot of factories are going to embrace this idea of giving fringe benefits to their workers, of giving them a higher wage, of giving them better working conditions, so that they will be a part of the economy, raise the standard of living for a lot of people, allow those folks to buy the products that they're manufacturing, and diminish the number of strikes. And if there are strikes, the federal government in the 1920s issues injunctions to end those strikes. What's an injunction? Well, it doesn't have to be a military intervention. It just has to be an order. A lot of times they use the military, but it's an order to stop a strike.
Aren't teachers unionized?
They are. It's actually, in Maryland, an association. But yes, teachers are unionized in some states. In other states, they're not. Today you hear a lot of something, I'll get right to you, Kramer. Today you hear a lot of something called right to work. States are passing what are called right to work laws, which all sound great. Ooh, yeah, I want to work. But what a right to work law basically says is that unions are illegal. So that employers can pay their workers less. Yeah, Kramer.
When was the last time the government issued an injunction?
Well, the most noteworthy one was probably Ronald Reagan. In 1981, the air traffic controllers went on strike. And Ronald Reagan said, go back to work or you're fired. And they didn't go back to work, so Reagan fired all of the air traffic controllers who belonged to the union. So there you go. Yeah. Hey, Ronald Reagan, man, he was somebody you don't mess with. Say what you want about Reagan. Man was effective. Now, The one group that really doesn't experience the prosperity of the 1920s are farmers. And this is pretty much why. Technology, and this has been an old chestnut for farmers. The more technology there is, the more they can produce. However, the more you produce, the more the price of goods drops, which means you need to sell more of your stuff in order to break even. And farmers are not breaking even because the high tariffs are limiting where they can sell their goods. So farmers are borrowing to buy all this new technology. They overproduce, and then they can't sell their goods. So throughout the 1920s, farmers are generally going to fail. Farming is not an endeavor you want to get involved in the 1920s. And farmers go looking for help. They want the federal government to step in and make up for the loss. Farmers argue that, hey man, you're putting these high tariffs in place, which are limiting our ability to sell goods overseas. So why doesn't the federal government make up the difference in lost profit for us? It's what's called parity. Basically, it's the federal government paying you what you lost in order for you to break even. That's what parity means. Par. If you play golf, par means even. A disparity is an unevenness. Par, even. And that call for parity comes in what's called the McNary-Haugen Farm Aid Bill, and that's what Calvin Coolidge vetoes twice. Now, I will tell you that Franklin Roosevelt is going to embrace the idea of parity during the Depression. He is going to pay farmers subsidies. He is going to pay farmers for what they did not produce in order to make up that gap. It's called the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. It's one of the successes of the New Deal. But that idea of farmer parity doesn't go away just because Coolidge vetoes it. This is an age of modernity in terms of manufacturing and what you can buy and what you see being created in the 1920s. This is an age of modernity. In terms of art, this is the age of Art Deco. Has anybody ever been in the Empire State Building? It is the epitome of Art Deco. What strikes you when you walk in there, Drew? There is. What's like the color scheme and the use of materials? There is red carpet, yeah, which kind of ushers you into this place. What about the walls and the materials on the walls? Do you remember? Josh, do you remember? It's all marble and metal and stainless steel, which kind of evokes what? The future. Streamlined, futuristic. That's what Art Deco embraces. It embraces geometry. It embraces modernity. It embraces the future. So you're seeing a lot of that in the design and technology of the time. The buildings, the architecture. A lot of the buildings have a streamlined look to them. The Chrysler Building was built in this period of Art Deco. The whole outside of the building is clad in a stainless steel, and it looks modern. I mean, that building still holds up today. The Empire State Building. The guy who came up with, I don't have a pencil. To illustrate my point, I don't have a pencil. Oh, I do. When they were asking how to build the Empire State Building, the architect says, "This is my idea." And if you look at the Empire State Building, it looks like a pencil
Good morning, Southern. Your morning announcements will be on shortly.
They sure will. So there is an emphasis on technology, ease and comfort, challenging social traditions, and when we come back next time, whenever there's a next time, we'll take a look at that. And for you folks who were, missing out on yesterday's review session, we'll just try it again on Monday next.